Welcome to the Vibrant Life podcast. This is the official podcast of the Vibrant Life community. I'm Sarah Nolan, and I am a burnout prevention and energy management consultant. And I am here with Janet Taylor, who is an amazing parenting coach. And she has an incredible story to share with you today that I think a lot of you who are watching and listening can relate to. And maybe you haven't talked about it with anybody yet, because it's one of those things that just feels so unapproachable to other people. And so I'm hoping that by Janet telling her story, then you might feel a little bit more comfortable talking about your story as well, because that conversation is part of the healing and recovery process for everybody involved. Janet has an amazing story about overcoming some very serious family challenges, and what it has blossomed into is just beautiful. So thank you, Janet, so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to hear more of your story. We were just chatting quite a bit about it. And I know that you've got even more. So thank you so much. And why don't you tell us a little bit about where you were, with your daughter, and kind of that journey, and what helped you to kind of wake up and have some realizations and get to where you are now.
Right. Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. I really appreciate this. And I'm hoping my story does connect with a lot of parents that are feeling alone right now. Basically, my daughter 6 or 7 years ago started self-harming, the drugs, the alcohol, different behavior, emotions, different places. She was just turning 12, 13. She was dealing with everything that goes on then. And, there was a lot on her plate in looking back. But the behavior started.
What kinds of things were on her plate? What was going on with her?
She was transitioning. So here where I am, we go from grade 6 to grade 7. Now you're in a high school. Your body as a 12-year-old girl these days starts to change. Your friendship group kind of changes. And in looking back, there was a definite change in the friends she was choosing to hang around with. And I didn't not approve of these friends. I was always, trying to get her out there, have lots of friends. She always did. She was very unique in her personality. She would, little tutus going to school. It didn't matter what anyone thought. And then all of a sudden, as she entered grade 7, in realizing now it's a bigger arena for kids to be bullied, stuff even the children aren't going to tell their parents. And her emotions started to change. So there was a lot going on in that pubescent stage with her mental state, with her development. And I'm saying all this from hindsight. So I completely get that in parents that are struggling with that. And it came through in the self-harm, in the drug use, first over-the-counter medication, in the daring behavior. Like she was always courageous, but now it was getting to be a little bit scary. And so just it to me, it's like watching a movie in 3 or 4 years played out so quickly. But we were spiraling. She wasn't attending school. She wasn't connecting with us when she was home, and she wasn't home very often. She was with these friends. And I encourage that, because I grew up with a lot of friends, and they're your support network at that time. And again, self-harm then, and the mental health stuff. So we're talking 7 or 8 years ago here in Canada was just coming to the forefront. And I was working. I had 2 other children. And I'm not going to in any way come off as making any excuses for what I was aware of or not aware of. And I thought it was great. Like, I thought the kids were doing well until they're not. It's stereotypical, but until you get that call from school. And for me, that was, she had gone to school and she was now drunk at 13.
So from your perspective, what you were seeing was she was hanging out with friends all the time, but you didn't necessarily realize what was going on.
Yeah, it was different friends, different behaviors, but I'm attaching it because it was simpler for me as a mom. Just go, oh, well, she's prepubescent. Right. I'm going to give her the freedom to grow, because her father and I were now separated and divorced. We were getting along. 2 other little kids they were both younger. So she's my oldest. And, she was still she was pulling off whatever she needed to pull off, but it started getting later nights. There started to be different behavior. And looking back,
what kind of behaviors?
Definitely the emotional. She wanted to color her hair all the time. She was wearing long sleeves when it wasn't appropriate. Her, the way she was speaking to me, and I was pretty open as far as that went. I had rules. I'll be honest. I had boundaries and I had rules. And then just, she was pushing that. And I know for myself as a kid, when I started to push that, it was because something was going on. So in some ways I wish, I could go back and say, I wish I'd seen that sooner. And that was the sign later that she was being bullied at school, and she had tried to get help at school and she wasn't getting it. So there's always something, right? But I wasn't listening at that time, or I wasn't in the same channel. Let's put it that way. So we get a call from the school. Avery's drunk. I'm like, well, that's weird. How did that play out? And she explained it perfectly. These are highly intelligent children we're raising. That's very important to know that they are super intelligent, and what they have at their fingertips in technology, they can Google what they don't know. Right. So that passed. She got grounded. We didn't really, her father and I discussed it, but we're kind of like, weird, hopefully a phase. And you definitely don't know what you don't know. So a few weeks later, she's sleeping over at a friend's house at a cottage, a little bit out of town. We get a call. Oh, my daughter's not well. She's taken some medication. We don't know what. I'm like, okay, well, take her to the hospital. We'll meet you at the hospital. No, we don't care. They took it themselves there. And I'm like, you're the parents. If the child has overdosed, which is what you're telling me, you need to call an ambulance then, and I will go meet my child at the hospital. No, we had to go pick her up. So my ex and I are driving for an hour and a half, freaking out, right? Because we don't know what we're getting into. And when we got there, she was definitely high. She was definitely borderline overdosing, but she was conscious enough to have a conversation with us. And that was one of the most enlightening conversations I've had with my daughter, because she's still high, not realizing she's talking to her mother and father, who are driving her to the children's hospital now. Because what she ended up taking some cancer medication for the girl's grandfather, and quite a bit of it. So, I mean, there was a health concern. There's a medical concern here now, but also I'm still trying to wrap my head around that this is my daughter spewing forth during this car ride, all this different stuff she's been doing because of the bullying. And now we're finding out that maybe there was some inappropriate touching. There was something that happened with another kid when she was younger, and all this stuff I would have, hoped that my children would have come to me and told me. Like, that was always the message between her and my father. There isn't anything you can't tell us. It's not. But when they're kids, you don't tell, you just don't. Right. So, and spiraling there, we get to the hospital about 2 hours later, and we're dealing with doctors now. And when in this examination for health and everything, they took off this long sleeve shirt she's wearing, and her arms were all cut. That was my window into self-harm. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So the reason she was wearing these long sweaters, the reason, that she's doing this is because cutting is a thing and self-harm is a thing. And I apologize to anyone that is a trigger. I understand for some people, but it was something I had no idea. I did not understand that harming yourself is let's just say, it's not necessarily a proper anxiety fix, but it is definitely a rush for somebody who's going through something deeper level, that in the cutting themselves, I've learned since in the last 6 years that gives them some sort of release. And it's a horrible way that they can't communicate that, because I like to think there's much better ways of sorting that out. So that was a whole, like, I'm as shocked as she is in the hospital now, because they're pumping her stomach, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around this is my daughter, and I wanted to protect her, right? And I say that really truly wanting to have protected my child, and there was not a thing I could do up until this point. And that led to repeated visits to the emergency room for the next year and a half or so. The mental health, she started spiraling. There's only so much you can do as a parent to control an environment. And when a child really wants to hurt themselves, they will find a way. And when we're talking self-harming, we're talking anything, like anything that you can cut yourself with. My daughter was shoplifting it. She was taking it. Again, I have to be very careful on this. And what I've learned that, I'm really not trying to trigger anyone, but as a parent, she was so smart that these little pencil sharpeners we have that are like hand pencil sharpeners, they're not on, they have a little blade on them. And that's what's online. That's what they're breaking up and smashing a light bulb.
I know you mentioned a couple of times about triggering possibly with the story. I think this can be a huge wake-up call for some parents who just aren't, I wasn't raised with the kind of technology that is available today. And so it would never occur to me that, like, oh my gosh, my 9-year-old could be looking stuff up, like certain things.
I can give you a very scary story about that. Yeah. Technology on its own.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out, that, it may be hard to hear, but this is the reality of how things can be in certain situations. So,
and the boundaries that our children are pushing back on as parents, we have every right to establish. That is my biggest lesson in learning, in controlling what I can control about myself and who I show up as a mom every day for all three of my kids. My oldest doesn't live at home, and she hasn't lived at home for a long time. But those boundaries that, no, your computer is going to be at the kitchen table. You are going to get a couple hours at the computer, and that's it. And I am going to know your passwords. Those are boundaries nowadays that we have to have in place, because what they're looking at when you're not there, they're so smart. They're so fast. They're like they can pop something up. But I remember my daughter coming to me, and timelines with this are fuzzy, so nobody correct me on my timelines, but she came to me some point during this and she goes, Mom, I love this guy. He's in love with me. We're going to be happy forever. And I'm thinking, you're 14. What are you talking about? Or 13 or whatever age she was. And she goes, Mom, he carved my name in his leg. He loves me.
Oh my gosh.
So obviously I'm thinking, okay, you've connected with a gentleman here, like an older man. You've connected with somebody who's carved your name in your leg. But my biggest oh my God part was, now you think this is love? So where in that is that boundary? But that's where the mental health was starting to show up in her head. And we're seeing psychiatrists at this point, psychotherapists, everybody. We're doing everything we possibly can. My ex-husband had great connections in that field. He was a social worker. We're trying to get all these things. They've put her on different medication now to try and figure out what she is, which is also another something to be aware of as a parent. You get to choose more than you think you do.
Yeah.
What methods help your children. So be very aware of them being put on medication when they're not old enough to be diagnosed. So I started asking those questions again later. But why is my daughter being put on medications if you haven't shown me that this is the situation, right? Because in those teenage years, those development years of 12 to 19, their brains are so fragile that some of it is normalcy, or was normalcy when I was growing up. And some of it's just experimenting at a very good level. And I don't by any means saying the self-harm, the drugs, any of that. But there is some of that development that's going on. They just want to be who they want to be. And we have to open that space up so that, and online and this technology too is showing us, no, be like this, be like that, be like this. So my daughter's trying to fit in. She's posting on anonymous web pages, right? Where you can ask a question. Like, I'm a 13-year-old asking other people anonymously if I'm beautiful. You can just imagine what the responses are you going to get.
Yeah.
But that's my child asking these questions. She does not see the beauty in her that I see. She does not think she's worthy now. So now we're getting into suicide attempts, right? Now we're walking into Walmart, and I'm apologizing for using that name, but that's where she went. And she stole some Tylenol off the counter. And I get a call at midnight. So whether or not she was in the group homes at this point or not, or just in and out of youth facilities that were trying to help me, like everything we could get people to come into the house, communicate with us so that we could keep her in the home. And eventually she ended up being a ward of the province. But that me thinking that was the system that was going to help her as well too, which, isn't necessarily what it's there for. But, so she took these 43 Tylenols. That's the phone call I get. Janet, It's 1 a.m. It's so-and-so from the group home or the youth facility. We just found out your daughter took 43 Tylenols. You need to go to the children's hospital and meet us there, because we're bringing her by ambulance. And as I'm driving there, which again, parents, that's not good. Don't be driving your car in these situations, right? Who are you putting in danger when your brain, I'm not sleeping at this point. I'm not, I'm just struggling with who I see myself as a mother and who I'm showing up as a mother. It's so different. And I'm driving to the hospital going 43 Tylenols. I'm thinking she's going to be dead by the time I get there. Like, I am seriously, like, at this point I'm going, what have I done? And that's a very selfish thing, but it's a very normal thing too. And I've had a lot of, self-education, self-looking, so I can say both sides of that. It's educating and it's knowing what you couldn't have done. I couldn't have done anything differently. That wasn't available then. And this is why I do this now. And Parents Never Give Up was created. But in this story, I'm not telling anyone, right? Like, obviously I'm showing up at work, and I was driving for a living at the time, right? Like, professional driver here. And I'm going to the hospital at 1 a.m. I'm starting my shift at 5 a.m. She was fine. They pumped her stomach and she was fine. She thought this was hilarious. While I'm writing her obituary, while I'm driving to the hospital, because now my oldest child is dead in my mind.
Right, yeah.
We know, as anybody, you can create these situations and then there were so many of them though. Then from that point, it just once a week, at least, I would get a phone call in the middle of the night, Avery this, because she was getting attention out of it. And I won't say that she was seeking it. She was getting attention from this behavior. So within that, that's again, parameters, boundaries. She's not going to school. She dropped out in grade 9. She's attending some courses here and there, but she has not gone back. And she's a highly intelligent child who's suffered now from the drug use. There is some definite issues, physical, mental issues, but she's still struggling with whatever's going on mentally. And I can't see that, right? No one else but her can see that. And that's that powerlessness as a parent. We get angry. When our children see us in that anger, because I don't want to seem like I don't know what to do, right? I'm the mom. I'm supposed to know what to do. I'm asking for help from all these agencies. And I did luckily connect with an agency for parent support. Like all of a sudden I realized, okay, my candle is burning, like melting faster than anything. And I'm looking for help. And so what's out there for parents? And there was a few friends that knew what I was going through, but I started just saying, you know what? I can't believe I'm going to the hospital this many times a week because my daughter's harming or whatever. And within like one out of every few conversations, somebody's going, oh my God, my daughter's doing the same thing.
Wow. Yeah.
And for me, clearly, and it's in one of my blogs on my page, is this moment I was sitting in the emergency room. It had been my 15th or 16th visit. I'm funding the hospital at this point with my parking, by the way, but we are lucky we have a great hospital. But I realized I'm away from my other 2 children when this is happening. So luckily, I'm very thankful my mom was present to their needs. So I could drop her off, or their dad and we would work it out. And I'm sitting there in the emergency room, and I remember looking up, and there's a sign on the emergency room wall that said 75% of emergency room visits at your local children's hospital are for mental health.
Wow.
So the biggest thing that struck me is I'm going, that means 75% of the parents in this room are here because their kids are hurting internally.
Oh my gosh. And
for me, I just go, oh my God. And none of us are talking. None of us are sitting in this emergency room speaking, because the shame and the grief, and I'm going to get choked up here, but is so powerful.
Now, what was going on with you personally during this time? And like, was there ever a point where you had a shift that was like, I need to start, doing something differently, or like doing something for myself, or like, you know what I mean? Yeah, there was one moment when I was at a parent group, and my daughter had been in care now for 2 or 3, 4 years so far, or 2 years probably about that. And I'm in this parent group, and they're telling me, and I remember hearing the woman specifically say, you should have done this. And I remember just taking my pen and paper, and this is, I don't know, the umpteenth time I'm at this parent meeting group. My daughter's not at home anymore, and I'm still hurting at this point. And I slam my book down, and I go, that's it. I'm done. She chose this. I need to choose to take care of myself. I'm overweight. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm this angry person I don't even recognize in the mirror anymore. I don't even probably make eye contact with whoever this woman is in the mirror. I have 2 other beautiful children at home that need me to help them deal with whatever's going on. You're now visiting your child in children's aid in a group home. How afraid are they? And I remember just feeling this, something inside me just went, okay, this is not who you are. This, and I'm talking about myself only, this pathetic, angry, bitter woman. That's not me. I have skills. I'm intelligent. I'm not choosing to do all this but here I am, exactly like my daughter, sabotaging myself. And then that's kind of when I went, no more. And for me, I was lucky and fortunate enough somehow to be in the Tony Robbins world and just realize, you know what, I'm going to go connect with some people. And how do I truly put one foot in front of the other? So how do I connect with that energy I was feeling inside of me? And so I show up at this Unleash Power Within, 14,000 people. And I really dug deep into, okay, this is where she is. This is where I am. What's my outcome? What am I capable of achieving? And for me, that totally looked like, how do I help the other parents that are still here, feeling that shame, that grief, the pain? The 75%. Exactly. And it's probably higher than that now, because teenage suicides are high. Number 2 killer, I think, in Canada alone, for sure in Canada. Are you serious? Yeah. I'm not sure what it's like in the United States, but it's probably similar. We're talking, and when I say kids, I'm talking 10 to 19. Right. 10-year-olds are killing themselves. And 75% nobody hears about it. I don't hear about that. That's a whole media thing. That's a whole media is controlling what we hear, what we don't hear. And I've tapped into some of that. And in having these conversations, going, okay, if I'm talking to 100 parents and 75 of them are having to deal with this and they're not talking about it,
Oh, because,
Gosh,
I'm
that
the
is
only
like
parent.
mind blowing.
Yeah. What's
Just
the
like let
media?
that soak in, like for everybody who's watching and listening, and
Yep.
you have a story remotely similar to what Janet's talking about, you are the majority.
Our
You're
kids
the
are not
majority. Like the
communicating.
person who's next to you right now, they're probably dealing with it too.
Exactly. That's 3 out of 4 people at a table, just so we're clear.
Right.
And when I say we're
Yeah.
not communicating, we're allowing our children to be on these things because
Mhm.
I've gone to restaurants, the parents, mom and dad are on the phones, kids are on the phone. There's no boundaries there. We're all this, right? But this
Mhm.
isn't real. This is not that connection you want to have with your child. Like I catch myself like texting my daughter upstairs, you ready for school? What am I
Mhm.
doing? I need to get off my ass, go up there face to face. What are you doing? You need to get ready for school. We haven't lost the ability to connect with our children. We've
Right.
chosen the easy way out. And that's
Right.
exactly what the media, what the technology, what all that wants you to do, right? Because that's
Mhm.
easy. We're choosing easy because we are working more than we've ever worked. But when
Mhm.
it comes down and who I am as a parent, what was I working for? I wanted my kids to be happy. I wanted to have them all this, but I'm working. I'm not enjoying the moments that they're having their plays at school. That's not true. I was lucky enough to have I got to see some of that, but I wasn't present to when she needed me most. That was the other lesson. When I came out of that meeting, I'm going, I missed this. I missed all of this. But you know what? She's still alive, and there was multiple suicide attempts,
And how
multiple
old is she
overdose.
now?
She's 19 now. She's almost
Okay.
20. Um, and she hasn't lived at home in 4 or 5 years, and those are my boundaries.
Mhm.
I've had issues with the other two as well, but because I've learned, no, wait, I'm the parent. And I remember seeing an episode of Reba. I don't know if you ever got to join that. Is an amazing comedy. And I remember her looking at her youngest going, listen, it's not my job to be your friend. It's my job to be your parent, your mom.
Mhm.
And sometimes we harbor this resentment towards our parents, and we're like, oh, I'm never going to be like you. I'm going to be that parent that gives, but our children don't want the stuff. They
Right.
don't need the stuff. They need us to be present, because my daughter was present. She was outside, she was playing, she was connecting, but something else was going on. And I knew at that level.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Just real quick, I had a kind of a wake up call with that through my process of recovering from some of the inner emotional traumas, where I realized like a child is such pure love.
Mm-hmm.
As a
Mm-hmm.
baby, they're like God in human form.
Beautiful.
And I couldn't handle, like wasn't aware of this, but I couldn't handle that love. I couldn't handle that positive vibration when I was a new mom. And my son nursed constantly, like 24 hours a day, he had to nurse. And so it's like, we're right there, right? But I would find every little thing I could do to escape it. And so I was like glued to my phone with like Netflix. And I would just like try, and like the minute he fell asleep, I would like get up and like leave, And so it got me thinking, well, what other ways have I tried to escape that like brightness, that love that is just so pure? As adults, we're not used to that. We're used to like fake love. We're used to, all, the negativity. But then when you have this like beautiful, pure love as a child, with your child, it's, I think, very common for parents to try to escape it, because it doesn't feel there's a contrast between what they feel and what they feel they deserve and what's the reality.
And we have to admit that we don't get to go back. That's painful, right? We don't get to go
Yes.
back.
I know.
But what we lose sight of is that we have today. And in empowering other parents and in my coaching, I teach people today is good enough. Today's the day you could start listening to your 12-year-old, your 2-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 19-year-old, your 36-year-old child. You can still listen to them. They still have value. And when you can just be present, that like I get to see my oldest once every few months. It's very tiring. I have to be very present. It's very, it's painful. So, but loving all at the same time. And I get to love her. And that's what I show up with, because that's why it's so tiring. I'm like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be present, and she's going to suck all that out of me, and I'm going to love her to death. And I'm going to give her one little tidbit that she's still going to know that she's loved, no matter what she believes that this. And I remember way back, I used to beat myself up saying, oh, I could have. No, but I can do this now.
You can do this
I can't
now.
give her all the money in the world, because that doesn't solve any. I've tried that. I've tried to give her stuff. She sells it. She scalps it. Now I'm giving her the means to find some drugs. you know, and when you realize that, you know, when my daughter was 14, 15, and she was doing some pretty heavy drugs with no money, there's only one way she's getting that. And that shocked me. And I was like, oh my God, she's selling herself. That's not anything I would ever have wanted for my daughter. Like she in some way disrespects herself so much that this is okay. She's healed, and I can't, but I just have to be there and love her. And when she calls, whatever time I try and, you know, be that person for her, there's a pain inside her that's still there. I can see it. But okay, what's the lesson for me? What can I do when I show up for her and my other two children or the other parents?
Yeah.
She's hurting. I'm hurting. The other 74% of us are hurting, you know, and we're not talking, we're working ourselves to death at jobs we're not happy at. And in getting that moment when I could look at that woman in the mirror and tell myself, I love in myself, I'm worth it. This has all been a path to here, to today, December 10th. You know, you and I having this conversation, this is the path. I have to welcome that. There's no monetary value on any of this. I can't buy her safety. I can't buy her happiness. She may think she can. And there's a whole bunch of parents out there trying to buy their kids happiness and stuff.
Yeah.
We're not even buying our own happiness. I don't care how big your house is, how fancy your car is. If your child is trying to hurt themselves, and with the suicide rates, and there's some pretty high-end suicides we've read about. I mean, you know, Robin Williams, that's horrible. Kate Spade, all these people that we look at them, they have everything. You know, some people would have looked at my daughter and go, wow, you have everything. I would have looked at myself maybe back then and gone, I have the perfect life. But what's behind the Teflon? What's the Wizard of Oz lesson in all of this for all of us? But to me, it ultimately comes down as technology plays a part, you know, the ability to get money and stuff, but it really comes down to communication with our children.
Yeah.
And yes, I have two other teenagers and they don't speak the same language I do, but I have the choice to be present and kind of let them know, connect. What's this? You know, if all of a sudden new friends are popping up, well, who is this new friend? My daughter hates everything that's happened, my youngest, because she has to send me pictures of where she is so that I really know she's there. And she doesn't get it from my perspective. But I'm like, Rosie, you don't know what you don't know. She hates when I say that. But I'm like, I now know that I need to know where you really are. I need to meet your friend's parents if you're going to sleep over. I have to have that understanding. And as parents, I respect that in another parent that wants to meet me, right? That wants to know who I am. If our children are going to do this together, okay. I want to get that feeling, that stomach. And I know you've had that as a mom. You get that. We don't rely on that enough now. It's nowhere on our phone. There's no app for that gut feeling that a mother has when something's up with one of her kids. Or, you know, when you see their face and you know darn well they're not telling you quite the thing you think they're telling you. So it's just being present and communicating with them. And that goes as a parent too. They have stuff to teach us. Yeah. Our children could teach us a ton if we listen. They're so innocent. That love you said when they're newborn, that's, you know, just those nights now that you wish you could have watched them sleep or just spent that extra 5 minutes in the tub or splashing around with them in a puddle outside. But nothing stops us from doing that now. There's nothing stopping you from going out, just watch your kids sleep or read them a book, read with them. You know, don't do it for them. What books are they reading? You know, what do we have playing a board game? My God, it's hilarious to see that in your kids. And even if it is their weird board games, whatever they're playing now that are not board games to us, but fun nonetheless.
Like pie in the face.
Stuff like that. That thing with the mouthpiece, that makes me laugh. Yeah. So, you know, just watching them laugh, like at any age. And see, and now I'm able to be present enough that I watch my mom with her grandchildren and realizing how happy that is, that I can have that too as a mom. I don't have to bust my ass for what, right?
Right.
For another fancy outfit or another fancy this and that's my whole goal, is in connecting with parents just to get us to slow down. They're teenagers before we know it. That's one thing I remember my mom saying, you know, you grow up so fast. You're so big. You got your kids of your own. And I'm thinking, Mom, you're losing your marbles. But wow, she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just that.
So Janet, gosh, I feel like we could talk for hours about this. I'm super passionate about everything you're talking about, and I'm so glad to have you here as a resource. And if whoever is inspired by this, like watching, listening, inspired, reach out to Janet on Facebook. And do you have a website you want to share? Like, what's the best way for people to reach out?
Well, I'm now on Instagram and Facebook under Parents Never Give Up. So on Instagram,
Parents Never Give Up. Okay.
Parents Never Give Up. That's my handle. That's my, how 80s is that, eh? handle. But that's my thing. That's my blog. So WW Parents Never Give Up is my blog. So I wrote a lot of stories, mostly a couple years back when I was going through all this stuff. But also my Parents Never Give Up, and it's also on Facebook.
Awesome.
And you can reach me through that. That's the best way. And just message me if you're doing this. I mean, this is something where you don't realize when you're in the pain right now. It's a helpless feeling, and there's so many moving parts that just reach out. Like, I get it. I really do. At every self-harm, the overdosing, the addiction, the mental, the parenting, that while you're working, while you're trying to keep the house together, everything going on, there's so many moving parts, but it's important to get help. You're not alone. That was the biggest key in setting everything up. When I came out of that UPW, that was my biggest takeaway is I'm going to be here for any parent that needs me. And the connections I've made through that, I had a charity called Cards for Hope. And I say had because I don't focus on that as much, really focusing on helping the parents, but just the people you connect with on the conversation of mental health. You know, some of us think we've had a normal childhood. Then you start connecting with other people and you're going, okay, maybe that wasn't so normal. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, you know, there's a reason that our children are struggling, and, you know, let's just be open to helping each other all around as a community. So.
Exactly. And I just want to say, you know, for whoever decides to work with Janet in any capacity, I also have a gift that I'd like to give you to support that. You know, it's a really good compliment for that. It's a year subscription to the Rejuvenation Club. And so just let Janet know that you heard this podcast, and we'll hook you up with that year subscription just as a gift, and like, thank you for joining us. And definitely reach out to Janet. She's an amazing resource for whatever you're going through. So thank you so much for joining us today. Wherever you are, drop a comment. Let us know what is one takeaway from this episode, and ask Janet any questions that you have. We'd be happy to answer. So thank you, Janet, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me and letting me share this. It gets easier every time you share it. So it really does.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.